Hi, friends. Welcome back to Stay Anchored Kids. Last time, we learned how Abraham and Sarah became impatient and tried to help God fulfill his promise in their own way. But today, we're going to see something amazing. After all the waiting, after all the doubts, after all the years that passed, God finally kept his promise. Now remember, God had promised Abraham that he would have a son. But by this point, Abraham was almost 100 years old and Sarah was 90 years old. That's really old. In fact, they were far beyond the age when people normally have children. From a human perspective, it seemed impossible. But nothing is impossible for God. One day, just as God had promised, Sarah became pregnant. And she gave birth to a baby boy. Can you imagine how excited Abraham and Sarah must have been? For years they had waited. For years they had hoped. For years they had wondered how God would keep his promise. And now they were finally holding their son in their arms. They named him Isaac. Do you know what Isaac's name means? It means he laughs. And that name was perfect. Years earlier, Sarah had actually laughed when she first heard she would have a baby in her old age. She thought it sounded impossible. But now her laughter had turned into joy. God had done exactly what he said he would do. Now, Isaac wasn't just important because he was Abraham's son. Isaac was important because he was part of God's rescue plan. Remember, God had promised that through Abraham's family, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. That promise would continue through Isaac, then through Isaac's descendants. And eventually, many generations later, Jesus would be born. Every step of the story was moving God's plan forward. Now, here's today's big question. Why does God sometimes wait so long to answer? The Bible doesn't always tell us exactly why, but often God uses waiting to teach us trust. Think about it this way. If Abraham had received the promise and the baby arrived the next day, everyone might have thought it was just coincidence. But after decades of waiting, there was no doubt this was God's doing. Sometimes God allows us to wait so that when the answer comes, we can clearly see his hand at work. And here's something else to remember. God's delays are not the same as God's denials. Just because God hasn't answered yet doesn't mean he has forgotten. Abraham and Sarah could have thought God forgot, but he hadn't. He was working according to his perfect timing. Now, sometimes people ask, can God really do miracles? The birth of Isaac reminds us that he can. The God who created the universe is not limited by what seems impossible to us. Miracles are possible because God is powerful beyond anything we can imagine. Before we finish today, remember this truth. When God makes a promise, he always keeps it. Maybe not on our timetable, maybe not in the way we expect, but always in the way that is best. All right, friends, thanks for joining me today. Tomorrow, we're going to learn about one of the most challenging moments in Abraham's life when God asked him to do something that tested his faith like never before. Before you go, here's today's challenge. Ask your parents or think about this question. What's something you've had to wait a long time for? And let's finish with a quick prayer. God, thank you for always keeping your promises. Help us trust you when we're waiting and remind us that you never forget your children. Thank you for being faithful in every season of life. Amen. See you next time, friends.